My background lies within medical anthropology. So I've done work in India and in Africa. I've done research work, several projects in India. And I've also done quite a bit of work with migrants and refugees in London, exploring how they understand mental health and their strategies for looking for help and assistance. I've also done research projects with Brunel University, specifically looking at religious experience and the relationship with mental health, and with the Alistair Hardy archive as well. It's easier to understand them because the dominant Western model for looking at mental health is looking at chemical imbalance or disease of the brain, whereas in other societies, indigenous societies, Native American societies, or Australian or original African, they have different interpretation of what we call symptoms. And so it looks as if there's not just one model for understanding health and well-being. I found mostly the report offers help in helping us to understand the deeper realities of being human, the deeper realities of human experience, and it offers insight into other experiences other than the five senses. So it offers insight into near-death experience, end-of-life experience, remote viewing, remote sensing, clairvoyance, shamanism, all those kinds of things that scholars have looked at and have normalised when they look at that. We're accustomed in the West to unusual experiences. For example, Moses and the Ten Commandments, who had an experience of God, and Florence Nightingale, who heard the voice of God and who asked her to set up hospitals. We know about Lourdes and the vision of the Virgin Mary at Lourdes. So we're familiar with these kind of experiences, but the Galileo report helps us normalise and understand those. But my concern is with the link with mental well-being, because it seems that there's different types of people who have those unusual transformative experiences. There's people who have spontaneous experiences. They have a religious or spiritual experience, deeply transformative, and it stops. It affects them for life. Then there's other people who deliberately look for experiences, who deliberately seek them, like shamans or psychics or mystics, clairvoyants, who choose to have experiences and stop. There are people who take substances and do drumming in order to achieve altered states of consciousness. And the third group are those who have experiences, transformative experiences, but have no framework for understanding how that fits into their world view. So there's the people who have spontaneous experiences, the people who deliberately seek experiences, and those who have experiences and haven't got a framework for understanding. And that third group tends to be involved with psychiatry and be accused of mental health problems. What I would like to see is a change in attitude. I found that even people who study transformative experiences, even people whose living it is to do research, the medical model of mental health is so dominant that they don't make the link between those kind of experiences and what they study. So they assume there's religious experience, end-of-life experience, remote viewing, remote perception, and then there's the mentally ill, and it's nothing to do with them. And for me, that's the hardest, that even people who, it's normal to understand those kind of experiences, they still say, oh, mental health, it's something completely separate. So there's a real problem with the paradigm amongst our own scholars. I don't know how active they are in understanding different ways of thinking about mental health, because I found so often spirituality means compassion, kindness, and being nice. It doesn't mean acknowledging that there's completely different ways of understanding people's visionary and auditory experiences, and that the whole system needs to change. Because at the moment we're teaching medical students, new medical students, old ways of thinking about mental health. So although there are those groups, I don't know if it's enough for me towards the change. I've heard people, they become disturbed, people who are scholars and scientists in spiritual understanding, when I say that mental health is at the end of the continuum for those experiences, they'll either say, well, Natalie, you're completely wrong about this, or oh, maybe let's think about it. There's something to think about. Or there's people who've had experiences, either deliberately, spontaneously, or have come round, and they say, yes, you're absolutely right. So there doesn't seem to be a complete way of thinking about this. What I would like to see is the people who wrote the Galileo report to sit round a table with indigenous leaders, religious leaders, community leaders, and discuss the phenomena of unusual experiences, out-of-body experiences, and mental health, to collaborate over that. So, and the problem comes in the West, where our population is so diverse. There's people from so many different countries, and we've imposed a Western model of thinking about mental health on them. It's the same in countries where we've colonised. We've exported our model of mental health and psychiatry and chemical support. And even psychiatrists now are shifting their beliefs, and I'm sure the Galileo report would be really interesting reading for members of the medical professions, so that they could understand that the patients coming in with a certain set of experiences, they could situate more.
So normalising them in that sense.
Yeah, normalise the experience. I had experiences myself which made me realise that there were different ways of thinking, and I always thought I was normal. And then I started, one of my insights was to learn medical anthropology, even after I had a doctorate in something different. And it was to work with migrants and refugees to ask them what they believed was the cause of distress. And so it's not only the experiences, but it's also the trauma that people have, being forced away from the country of origin. So you have a population of, like for example, the population in London, it's extremely ethnically mixed, and we're doing people a disservice by supporting them medically with something that doesn't fit the paradigm of their own experiences. So I feel that the Galileo report, elements of it could be used to retrain in medical schools for students and for post-registration staff, so that they became aware of different experiences and different ways of interpreting. Things are already happening. Psychiatrists and psychologists are already realising that their training doesn't fit what they've learned about. the experiences that they have. And I found after doing research that those experiences that veterans have, there's writings about that from 2,000 years ago from ancient Assyria. Those experiences of having ghosts talking to you, telling you what to do. So it seems to be something that happens to people. And I think with cases of war, we need to be particularly careful because we're creating problems for society with people who are killed suddenly, and then they have memories, they come back, or they can haunt relatives or friends. And if psychiatrists aren't aware of that, even the language of that, whether they believe it or not, but just to engage with it and helps to heal. And I think there's so many different truths available that how do we work with the medical profession and the Department of Health so that they become aware of people's multiple truths? What I would like to see, that I mentioned before, is the scholars that have informed that report and scholars who study religious experience, out-of-body experience, remote viewing, spirit possession. I would like to see all these people sit round a table with psychiatrists and psychologists and the deans of medical school and people who've had experiences, the veterans, and people who've been incarcerated in psychiatric hospitals, to all sit round the same table and discuss the phenomenology of the so-called symptoms of the experience and see if there's any commonality. There's a group called Drop the Disorder, opened a year or two ago. It's now got over 10,000 people in it, made up of people who've suffered experiences, but also psychiatrists, psychologists, counsellors who are aware that there's a need to change attitudes around this. But as long as we've got the scientists and the scholars saying, no, our near-death experience is nothing to do with anybody who's had a near-death experience that causes distress. As long as we have the scholars saying that and not working together, then I think we can't have a paradigm change. So I think it's not enough just to acknowledge that all these transformative experiences exist. I would like to see a bridge between those experiences and mental well-being. So I see that as perhaps the future of the Galileo report, that people could get together around a table. And if I'm wrong, you can say, Natalie, you were out of order, you were wrong. We have changed consensus in the past with regard to mental health because we used to incarcerate people in psychiatric hospitals for having sex outside of marriage, or being lesbian or gay or homosexual. I have a colleague whose mother wasn't married when she had her, and she was always assumed to be, as a baby, she was born mentally defective. That was the assumption. So we've changed. There has been cultural U-turns about what we believe is mentally ill, and I think we need another cultural U-turn over these transformative experiences, because it could make a huge difference to humanity if they were treated differently. There seems to be so many people are having these experiences in the same way that I spontaneously had an experience, but I knew who I was and I knew what the experience was. And there must be thousands and millions of people who do that but don't have a framework for understanding. And then if they suffer distress or anxiety, or the people around them do, then they become incarcerated in the psychiatric hospitals or medicated. So I think there's the possibility with the Galileo report that it could trigger much more open research, even amongst its own scientists. Is that a dreadful thing to say?
No, thank you very much indeed.